Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks to President Zimmer and to the trustees for the opportunity to provide remarks on this very special occasion. Most importantly, congratulations to the new graduates. I am sure you must all be feeling very lucky to be here today. Some of you might think you're lucky to be here because the University Dissertation Office has not yet discovered that what you called page lowercase Roman numeral XVI should actually have been called page Arabic numeral 2. Or that somewhere deep inside your dissertation you italicized something, or maybe that you even listed your table of contents in your table of contents. I promise to be brief so we can graduate you before these transgressions are discovered. Some of you might instead think you're lucky that you survived so many Chicago winters while you were here, including the Snowmageddon of 2011. If you're a humanities PhD, given the data I've seen on time to degree, you might be feeling lucky that you survived the heat wave of 1995. Or maybe the tornadoes of 1967, or even the Great Chicago Fire. Or you might be thinking that you're lucky because in about an hour, you will graduate from an institution that is widely regarded as one of the 10 best universities in the entire world. On a planet with 7.2 billion people, this puts you about 10 standard deviations above the mean of the academic achievement distribution, which is so far out in the right tail, it makes me think that the achievement distribution must be of the thick-tailed non-normal variety. Now, unfortunately, your accomplishment also puts you in the company of people who make jokes about non-normal thick-tailed statistical distributions. Don't worry, you're almost free. I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes talking about the real reason you and I are lucky to be here today. To see this, let's shift our gaze about 15 blocks south of where we are now in beautiful Rockefeller Chapel to the South Shore neighborhood, where nearly 1/3 of all families live in poverty and fully 95% of all residents are African American. So what does life in a distressed South Side neighborhood like this look like? Let's pick one day, June 2nd of last summer, a Saturday. At 3 in the afternoon, two groups of teens were arguing in the middle of 73rd Street about whether someone had stolen a bicycle from someone else. As the two groups start to separate, someone pulled out a .38 caliber semi-automatic handgun and fired, hitting a 16-year-old named Jamal Lockett in the chest. Hours later, Lockett was dead. 2 weeks later, prosecutors filed first-degree murder charges against the shooter, just 17 years old. Now, many of you may be asking yourselves, what could the 17-year-old shooter have been thinking? How could he possibly have thought that a used bike was worth the life of another human being? His thought process seems even more puzzling when you recognize that shooting someone on a crowded street in the middle of the afternoon in front of countless witnesses is basically throwing away 2 lives, not just one. A common explanation we hear is that these sorts of tragedies occur because of some sort of social or moral breakdown. The shooter must have been thinking that other people don't matter or that the rules don't apply to him. Political scientist John DiIulio of the University of Pennsylvania even coined a term for people he thought think like this: super predators. These sorts of attitudes develop, DiIulio claimed, because of a failure of some of our most fundamental socializing institutions, such as families and communities. If root causes like this are driving the violence problem, and if these root causes are hard to change, the implication of this type of root cause explanation is that people who are at elevated risk for violence will be hard to divert onto more pro-social life trajectories. Now, if you were a policymaker, what would you do if you thought that the violence problem is driven by, quote, super predators who are deeply committed to engaging in crime? You might think that the only thing you can do is to start locking people up. For better or worse, that's something the United States has been very good at doing for the past 40 years. In the 1970s, lots of people started to believe that social programs can't do anything to prevent crime. Since then, we've increased our imprisonment rate by nearly 500%, which now gives us the highest incarceration rate in the entire world. But can it really be true that the only way you can control crime is by putting 2.2 million people behind bars, with a prison population made up disproportionately of low-income young African American and Hispanic men? One of the great things about the University of Chicago is that not only do we take ideas seriously, we also view them skeptically. I helped run a research center called the University of Chicago Crime Lab that was not willing to take it on faith that the only way to prevent crime is through mass imprisonment, particularly in light of what we've been learning from psychology and behavioral economics about how human beings make decisions. After thinking about the problem carefully, it occurred to us, maybe the answer to the question, what was the shooter thinking, is that he just wasn't thinking at all. A growing body of evidence suggests a lot of our everyday behavior is automatic. That is, that we act without even thinking at all about what we're doing. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman of Princeton lays out this idea in his wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he describes the two ways humans think, with what he calls System 1, which is automatic and intuitive, and with System 2, which is more reflective and deliberative, but requires more effort. And so we tend to ration the System 2 thinking and selectively deploy it. Now, some of you might be thinking, can lots of our behavior really be that automatic? So ask yourself, can you remember how many doors you've opened today? I bet you can't. Have you ever pulled on a door that says push just because it has large handles? I bet you have. The sort of automaticity you see at play in those actions is usually a positive in our lives. We develop a set of scripts or heuristics that we automatically follow to guide a lot of our daily activities, without having to make the effort to think about them. Maybe the 17-year-old shooter in South Shore last June has an automatic script that says, I don't let my friends down, or I can't let other people think I'm a pushover. That sort of script probably works well for him in most of the situations he faces growing up, but it can lead to tragedy when you have a .38 semi-automatic handgun in your waistband. About a year ago, I was in the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, which is where the highest-risk juvenile arrestees in Chicago are detained while they await trial. A staff member there told me, 20% of the kids in here are criminals. You let them out, they'll do bad things to other people for sure. But the other 80%, I always tell them, if I could give you back just 10 minutes of your lives, none of you would be here. This argument suggests a lot of the violence is driven not necessarily by bad people, but by bad decisions made in the moment. Now, I would have been more than happy myself to just talk about these ideas in the abstract, but I was told that here at Chicago, you better have data in your commencement address. So I carried out a little experiment in collaboration with two local nonprofit organizations, Youth Guidance and World Sport Chicago, which was structured exactly like the sort of randomized controlled trial that provides gold standard evidence about what works in medicine, but still remains far too rare in the area of public policy. What we found was remarkable. Just 1 year of participation in a program designed to get teenagers to basically just slow down and behave less automatically, reduced the rate at which they were arrested for serious violent crimes by fully 44%. These findings, I think, provide striking support for the idea that we can reduce crime not by just locking people up, but rather by helping them during these critical 10-minute windows to think more about their thinking. So what does this tell us about why we're all lucky to be here today? What gift did we get that enabled us to be at the University of Chicago? We were lucky enough to have grown up in environments that tuned our automatic systems in ways that are adaptive for success in school. Our automatic responses aren't necessarily any better than the automatic responses developed by kids growing up in distressed South Side neighborhoods. They're just adaptive to different types of environments. Put any of us into a different environment, and the same automatic responses that serve us well in Hyde Park can get us into trouble. Here's a thought exercise that illustrates the point. After spending several years at the University of Chicago, your automatic systems have become trained to question everything, and I mean everything. For example, 2 years ago, I presented a research paper on school segregation to the Chicago Economics Department, for which I prepared about 40 PowerPoint slides for a 90-minute talk. There I was, 85 minutes into my talk. I looked down and realized that with all the questions, I was still stuck on slide 2. Why are you using Helvetica font? What is the sound of one hand clapping? How do I know that Jens is even your real name anyway? You need that question everything instinct to make great scientific contributions or to change how the world works. Now imagine that after this ceremony, you, recent University of Chicago graduate, are driving to Midway Airport from Hyde Park and get pulled over by a Chicago police officer along Garfield Boulevard in a neighborhood like, say, Englewood, where the homicide rate is like what you see in dangerous developing countries like Honduras or El Salvador. Police in places like this are worried that every car they stop could contain an illegal gun and are understandably focused on making it home safely at the end of their shift. Let me suggest to you that this would be a very good 10-minute window for you to try to dial down your Chicago workshop instincts and be at least moderately compliant. So one lesson is that a lot of your own behavior is also automatic, and your automatic system is set to default to Chicago workshop. But as you leave Hyde Park, you will find yourselves in situations where your automatic responses are not optimal, and you should be thinking Englewood traffic stop instead. A second lesson is that there are countless people whose automatic systems have been tuned differently by the requirements of navigating daily life in distressed, dangerous urban neighborhoods. And that, unfortunately, leads them to sometimes have trouble in situations where we all have a stake in them doing well. We may not yet have done enough to harness the power of helping people slow down and reduce automatic behavior. The world is set up to leave too many people vulnerable to making mistakes in key 10-minute windows that have disastrous consequences. That is how you end up with a society in which 11,000 people are shot and killed every year and over 2 million are behind bars. This is not the way the world has to be. It is people like you graduating from truly great institutions like this who can change things. With that, I think my own 10 minutes are nearly up. I congratulate all of you once again and look forward to following the great things that you all do in the future. Thank you very much.